In this video, I'm going to tell you about the reasons that you might play multiple different types of war games, or maybe just one. Recently, on an episode of the Every Other Sunday show, which, strangely enough, I generally do every other Sunday, you can see a playlist of it here. Put it on in the background while you're hobbying and listen to me yammer on and answer people's questions. Pachow. Anyway, in a recent episode, I basically, for the subject of it, was just like, hey, give me some topic ideas. And so people did that, and I went through the chat later on, and I wrote them all down. And then, you know, some of them, good-ish, some of them, maybe not. And then there are some that, not necessarily something I'm going to use, but it sparks an idea, which then sparks a different idea, and then here we are, we got a video. I have people ask me pretty frequently, well, why do you play so many different types of games? Sometimes the question comes from, frankly, a place of negativity. Like, well, why would you do that to yourself? What are you doing? You should just play this one game that everybody plays and you'd be happier. Other people are like, how do you do it? That kind of thing. How do you keep all of these straight in your head? Well, spoiler alert, I don't, but, you know, that's not really necessarily the whole point. So, you know, there are folks out there that within our hobby stick to just one game. They are known as playing this one game. That's the game. That's the only thing that they do within the hobby. They very possibly have other hobbies, whatever, but they just play this one thing. And then there are people out there, frankly, like me, who do a little bit of this and a little bit of that and a little bit of this, etc. So, what's better, I guess, is the question. Of course, better is a subjective term, but I do have some reasons here why a person might just play one game. They play just the one war game. And I don't mean they just play it once, and that happens a lot too, don't get me wrong, but I mean they play on the regular, but it's always just the same game. A big one generally is because they are playing competitively. They are trying to get good, as the kids say, and they're trying to get good at playing this one specific game. They want to go to tournaments, and they want to place at tournaments. They want to potentially win fabulous prizes. You know, sometimes you win stuff. But the idea behind it is that if you want to be really good at a specific game, you have to practice. You have to do it a lot. The people who you see in the top tier at pretty much any of the big tournaments in the country, those folks not only know their army list, their codex, their battalion book, whatever, battle tome, blah, blah, whatever, army, all that stuff. They know their stuff completely inside and out, back and front. They probably also know your army list and whatever, codex. Like when you're like, okay, well, I'm going to do this, and then they'll be like, oh, actually, you know, that guy can't do that more than once per game. And then you go back and look at it, and you're like, oh, yeah, no, you're right. Very good catch. That's how a person gets good in competitive wargaming, is understanding the rules. One of the biggest things about playing the game competitively, from what I've been told from competitive players, because I'm not one, is that knowing the rules is the most important thing. Sure, being strategic, you know, important, being lucky, but not looking back on the previous turn and going, oh, I forgot I should have done this because I have this special power for these guys in this situation. Never losing those particular, you know, options, never losing those things is really important. Always being able to take every opportunity that you are, you know, afforded in the rules, and never forget, oh, I could have re-rolled that. That's a big, huge thing at making it so that you definitely are better at winning, and understanding what your potential opponent can also do with their army. I mean, I know as a personal non-competitive player, I've gone up against people before and been like, wait, run that by me again? What? They can do what? And then they explain it again, and you're like, well, that sounds terrible. I don't think that that's a good idea. But if I would have known that, I wouldn't have put these, you know, particular units in harm's way, or I would have done something differently. And so knowing back and front an entire game, it's a lot easier if it's the only game that you play. Some folks just play one hobby game because that's all that they either can afford, have room for, have time for. You know what I mean? Like, if you start playing a lot of different games, very frequently, this game has these miniatures, and this game has these miniatures, and this game. And if you switch genres a lot and stuff like that, now you got castles for terrain, you got weird sci-fi ruins for terrain, you got spaceships. These things don't match particularly. If you take your skeletons versus your, elves and you're going to put them in a sci-fi village, that's going to look a little weird. So you end up having, doubling up on terrain and mats and all that kind of stuff. So some people just say, I'm going to stick with this one game that's just skeletons versus elves. We're going to have some castles and some trees. Boom, done. And that's it. And that totally makes sense. If you are, really interested in just keeping it condensed, I don't know anything about that, unfortunately, but if you're interested in keeping your tabletop gaming condensed, sticking to one game is also a super good idea. Kind of related to the previous point, sometimes you've just begun. You've just started out, and rather than starting out getting into tabletop wargaming in general, rather than jumping into 6 different games when you are first starting out, it is actually a pretty good idea to kind of maybe focus on one thing. Pick a game. Maybe it's something that people in your local area play or is played between, your friends if you don't play in shops and things like that, but you've got some friends and they've been playing and now you're interested in getting into it and they all play game X. I would suggest you probably focus on game X and just play with them and see where it goes. Maybe over time as you get more experienced and you get further and further along into the hobby, at some point you'll probably be like, well, I kind of might try this and I might try that. And that happens to a lot of people, but there are also reasons like the previous ones that I just mentioned when it doesn't. But very frequently when you start out, it is actually a very good idea to just start and focus on one game. Now, why do I, and some other folks as well, like to focus on, focus is a strong word, like to play a lot of different games, get involved in a lot of different tabletop games, indie stuff, well-known kind of mainstream stuff, for lack of a better term. Many times the reason is because I love the buffet. I love a buffet, don't get me wrong. But still, I love the buffet aspect to playing a lot of different skirmish games. Specifically skirmish games because you're not having to build an entire huge army, you're building small stuff. And I've talked about this, I don't know how many times before, but it allows me to have the ability to work on some skeletons, and then next month I'm working on some space dudes, and then next month I'm working on something else, I don't know, maybe military dudes that have they're World War II, but they have laser guns. I don't know, that kind of stuff. There's all kinds of different things where you can hop around, and I love the ability to not just be like, I'm going to be painting skeletons for the next 2 years. I don't want to be that guy. There's nothing wrong with it for other folks. I don't want to do that. I want to paint skeletons, get some skeletons done, and now I want to go on to space dudes or whatever. And I think it's important to understand what your specific interest level is. If you see it overwhelming to be like, I'm painting these guys, and then now I'm painting something completely different, and now next month I'm painting something completely different again, if that's overwhelming, then very possibly the one game plan is the plan for you, and the multiple game plan is not. But if you are like, you know what, I like to paint a little bit of this and a little bit of that and a little bit of this, then you should probably look at trying out a bunch of different games, and specifically skirmish games, again, because you're putting very little money, well, not too much money, and hopefully not too much time into each one, whereas an army is a much bigger deal. One of the benefits of having a lot of different types of models, of course, though, when you play a lot of different types of games, is eventually there will be overlap. There will be space people that you will paint for game X that will eventually work quite well in game Y, especially if you stick to the same scale. If you like to hop around between 28mm scale and, let's say, 15mm scale, that's going to be a bigger problem just because the models you paint for this game are going to look like huge giant monsters in this game, or the terrain's going to be very different weird sizes and stuff like that too. So the benefit is that you get to have models of a bunch of different, styles and genres and all that kind of stuff. But eventually, as you play more games, you will be able to say, well, I already got a bunch of skeletons. I can bring those from this game into this game. And now I don't have to paint any more skeletons, that kind of stuff. It just depends on how very, very specific each of these games and the models that you're supposed to use to represent the players, how specific they are. It might seem silly, but sometimes I'm just not in the mood to play a specific game. Maybe it has something to do with the way the rules are done. Maybe it has something to do with the way that I've painted it, or whatever. But it's fun to be able to just be like, you know what? I'm just not interested in playing this. Let's play this instead. And then having the models ready to go, and the terrain. Maybe the terrain, like I said before, can be switched back and forth between different types of games as long as the genre and the scale are roughly the same. But it's really nice to sometimes just be like, I want to play a quick, simple game. I'm not looking for an in-depth kind of narrative campaign. I just want to do something fun. And this game doesn't fit that bill, but this game does. Could depend on who your opponents might be. You might have invited somebody over who's never played these types of games before, or maybe hasn't played anything kind of indie, and you want to show them an indie game. And it's nice to be able to just switch gears. If you just play the one game, you're always just teaching people the same game over and over. This last point is something that, frankly, has happened to me recently, and I've also made a video about it a long time ago. One of the benefits to playing a lot of different games is when a company decides to come out with a new edition of a game and you don't particularly like it, that's okay. If it was your one game, if you played this one game, you played it weekly on the regular, all of your models were for it, all your terrain was for it, and then the company is like, we're making a new edition, and it completely takes the wind out of your sails and you don't like the new thing and all this kind of stuff, you've lost the entire hobby. And I made a video about this a long time ago, a really long time ago. My hair was a much different color back then, about diversifying your gaming. Pachow. And I think it's important, especially in the world that we live in these days, because there are times, the bigger companies have to crank out stuff more and more frequently. New editions have to come out on a very, very specific cycle, it seems. And when a new edition comes out and you don't like it, if it's your only game, well, now what? But if you are like, well, I also play 3 other games on and off and whatever, then I guess I'll just start putting more effort into that game. Well, then you've got a fallback. You've got yourself a parachute when you're only playing the one game and all of a sudden you don't like it. So if you only play one game, and some of the points that I talked about that maybe, about playing multiple games, if some of those ring a little true for you, or at least give you a bit of a, I wonder, maybe think about looking into some other games as well. I always think that people should try to diversify, hence the pachow from just a little bit ago. But I think it's important to be able to look at other games. Now, again, if you are, I have to place, I have to win, I have to be competitive, then you're probably going to be best focusing on one game. If you are trying to be competitive in one game, but you play 4 games, you might want to think about dialing it back and just focusing on the one that you're trying to win. That's also something. If you are, I am overwhelmed by the amount of games that I own and the amount of models I own, maybe again, dialing back, narrowing it down to one game might not be a bad idea for you. But if you like a lot of choice, if you like to have a lot of different games to choose from and be able to play on a whim, on a moment's notice, you like being able to paint all kinds of different weird things from week to week to week, maybe look into spreading your wings and looking at some other games that are, available probably online, possibly at your store,